find another way. Releasing control.
I find myself conflicted, to say the least. On one hand, we have one of the best games ever made, updated with modern graphics and subtle, seamless improvements, fixing mistakes, hindsight made apparent, allowing a whole new audience to experience it. However, on the other hand, I find a game where some of the simplest improvements we've wanted for years, things I would consider basic features, just aren't there. I understand that Mass Effect was originally a console title, later ported to PC, so I made some allowances for the extremely lackluster ports we got back then, but BioWare, you took years to make this remaster, and this is how you release it? Graphics options limited to resolution and anti-aliasing, no FOV slider, no master volume slider, and the single worst keybind disaster I've ever come across. Not to mention seemingly no thought for players who prefer a low DPI setting. Pre-rendered cutscenes that look so much worse than in-engine rendering, it completely breaks immersion. Using spacebar to advance dialogue, making it easy to get incorrect inputs, at least if you're using light switches in your keyboard, which I am. When I load up Total War Shogun 2, a game that launched 10 years ago, I'm presented not only with real power to dial in my graphic settings, but the ability to benchmark those settings. These aren't crazy things I'm asking for, it's the standard, and it's been that way for a long time, guys. I don't mean to be overly negative, because I really did enjoy my time with the game for the most part, but my main issue is that they improved things that were already good, like the graphics, while ignoring major frustrations that could have significantly improved the overall experience. But let's be fair to the game and break it down piece by piece like we did before, starting with gameplay. Remember 2 seconds ago when I said I wasn't going to be negative? Yeah, well, say goodbye to that for just a minute more as I look over my notes and notice more negatives than positives. Here's the issue. Mass Effect 2 was a huge leap as far as shooter mechanics compared to the first game, but it was catapulted into averageness, not something great by any means. It was clearly designed around a controller, and that becomes apparent when you come off a proper PC ported shooter. I play a lot of Siege, which means my mouse is at 400 DPI. Great for clicking heads in a fast-paced environment where every pixel counts. Bad when every environment feels like it needs a different sense and mouse acceleration that's always on in the background. Oh, what's that? Game has an internal mouse acceleration that you can only disable through game files? Oh, would you look at that? They managed to make a worse version of mouse acceleration. At least the Windows version has a checkbox. Alright, I'm getting angry and I'm being unfair. What improvements did I ask for, and were they made? Well, I asked to have the ability to remap my keybinds for sprint, interact, and cover separately. Did that happen? No. It's still the same dog shit where it's all mapped to spacebar, causing massive headache. Okay, not a good start. How about Praetorians I bitched about? Actually, they weren't a huge issue for me this time around, so maybe there was some behind the scenes rebalancing that I can appreciate. Okay, did we solve the overly tanky enemies that turn firefights into ammo finding simulator? No, it's actually worse, but this is a hardcore to insanity comparison that I have footage for, so I'm gonna call it even. So it's either the same or a little worse depending on how you look at it overall. Nice. Oh, and I should take the time to mention that Husks were one of my favorite frustrations, feeling like a massive threat as your ammo reserves dwindled and their sheer numbers began to overrun your small team. Although I would have liked to swap the armor for a doubled health reserve to allow for more liberal power use in dealing with them. Okay, so we really need to talk about exploration, how the poor mouse and keyboard implementation affects planet scanning, making it almost unbearable. Trying to scan a planet at a low sense is so painstakingly slow that I wouldn't be surprised to find out half of all PC players just avoided it entirely. And the only way I found out to do it with any kind of acceptable speed was to go and bump my DPI to 4,000, which is a ridiculous thing to have to do, especially on a full-size FPS mousepad. Beyond that, though, exploration itself remains essentially the same, with the worlds looking even better, and the lack of any real loading times anywhere makes worlds like Omega and Ilium a joy to wander through. Oh, and the Hammerhead still sucks. Hashtag Mako Gang. Moving on to the main missions, I'm gonna hit you with a spoiler warning so I can avoid beating around the bush with some of these main story missions. Head to this timestamp if you'd like to avoid that. Right off the bat, I'm just gonna say it, that on a fresh playthrough, early missions just suck. Most of your weapons feel like pea-shooters, while even low-level enemies pose an enormous threat. On Insanity, at least. A very big problem I found was in trying to deal with Vorcha on Morden's recruitment mission. They regen so fast that if you're playing a soldier who opted for Disruptor ammo over Incendiary for their first upgrade, and you don't have anyone with Warp, they're all but unkillable. Once you actually get to a high level with decent health and damage upgrades, the game plays pretty well if a little too easy, with my run through the collector base feeling far too simple compared to earlier levels. Guys, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the game should get harder as it goes on, not easier. The intro mission at Freedom's Progress hasn't seen any real updates, but I mean, it's an intro mission. If I wasn't stuck with terrible starting weapons, it would probably be a minor annoyance instead of a medium annoyance. So we'll let it roll. Horizon plays out pretty much the same as well, but I found the final fight with the Praetorian to be significantly less frustrating, and there was decent enough ammo pickups that I rarely felt overwhelmed in that aspect, allowing me to focus on mobility and positioning above everything else. Fighting against Harbinger for the first time was also an enjoyable mechanic at my current power level, and it was just an overall good experience. Working through the inactive collector ship was a pretty good time, with the updated graphics looking absolutely fantastic, especially when paired with everything you learned about the collectors while on the ship, and leading to a genuinely creepy experience that left me mildly freaked out in ways I don't remember from recent playthroughs. The only issue was some problems finding ammo in the more open arenas, especially while fighting Scions. The mission to recover an IFF on a derelict Reaper was also elevated from these same changes, especially when you get to some sections where the husks seem endless, but you're given plenty of ammo drops to take care of them if you're careful. Legion's updated character model looks stunningly good, and I never found myself in any particularly unfun gameplay scenario. Last small note, the abduction of the Normandy crew still feels like putting gameplay in front of the narrative, but some updated animations really do make the sections feel more intimidating. Wait, did I say last small note? I just completely skimmed over the last mission. Fuck. Okay, off the cuff. I don't have a script for this. The last mission was fantastic. It felt too easy because basically all my weapons and armor had been maxed out, but it's still one of the single best missions put into any game at any time, with real stakes bearing down on you and all your decisions leading up to a huge moment that feels absolutely fantastic. Oh, and we have these awesome new cinematics that, you know, still not my favorite, but they look much better. Take a look. I'm not going to go into any real depth talking about recruitment or loyalty missions, except to say they're all as good or better than I remember, with no notable changes I found in any of the missions. However, I will say that Tally's Trout hit me so much harder than I remember, but I'll be covering that in its own video because it deserves it. Alright, on to DLC. Overlord played much faster than it ever did before, completing it in almost exactly an hour. And I think this is from a combination of two things. One, lower loading times, which is just better all around. And two, I didn't stop for shit in the Hammerhead. I was like a dad with a 5-year-old that needed to pee, never stopping for data packets or shooting at any turrets. I could simply zoom by. Played without the annoying Hammerhead filler, working my way through David's story was a tragically beautiful way to spend an hour in the Mass Effect universe. Lair the Shadow Broker continues to be one of my absolute favorite experiences in Mass Effect 2, as it's a non-stop 2 hours filled with new environments, new challenges, and a fun, fast-paced story that has no dull moments, going straight from a mystery to a betrayal to a chase in a fucking taxi for whatever reason, ending up with an assault on the Shadow Broker where you get to watch Shepard throw hands with a 9-foot-tall, 3-mouthed demon. Pair that with spending some time with Liara again, all the goodies stored on the Shadow Broker ship, and I just can't recommend it enough. Last but not least, you'll always have Arrival, which I'll always have mixed feelings about. On one hand, you have a fun 15 minutes dipping your toe into solo stealth that doesn't try to overplay its hand, and the challenges presented by not having a team to fall back on push your own abilities, forcing you to really use your whole arsenal to survive. Unfortunately, the mouse acceleration issues, if you're on a mouse and keyboard, really do make that solo wave defense section a lot harder than it needs to be when you just can't click the heads you need to at the right times. On the other hand, something I didn't want to discuss in the non-spoiler section, but I feel like it needs to be said out loud, is that there's no option of choice here. You have to destroy the relay and kill all those people. You're putting 315,000 bodies on Shepard, and it leaves you in a spot where I think most people in the moment would have pushed the button regardless, but in retrospect, it feels a little forced looking back on it. It's just a weird moment for the series. Unfortunately, I'm left in this awkward position, whereas Mass Effect 2 is still one of the best games ever made, full stop, but on the other hand, as a remaster, I think it fails by choosing not to remedy the few actual issues the game had. For Mass Effect fans who already own the originals, it's hard to say buy the new one. It's really not any better than playing the originals when you exclude graphics and frame rate. But for someone who hasn't bought the game, I'd happily tell them to buy it and give it a try, especially coming off the first game where this should feel like a pretty solid improvement. Everyone should experience Mass Effect 2, and I'm happy this remaster will open more people up to it. I just wish this could have been the best version possible, and this just isn't it. To end on a more positive note, the issues involving gameplay don't detract from the fantastic characters and story that made this game great in the first place. So don't let my negativity lead you to missing this classic. I'm judging it as a remaster, not an original game. Mass Effect 2, at its core, is still a 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 experience. Well, I'm Purple, and that's going to be it for me on this one. I'll be starting the Mass Effect 3 stream soon, So follow my Twitter for more regular updates on the schedule. As always, have a good night, and always remember to smile.